The phone buzzed against my dashboard just as I was pulling out of my driveway. A text from my neighbor. Saw police cars at the Henderson place again. Domestic situation. Made me think of you and your family worries. I stared at those words while my old Chevy idled in the cold November air. The Hendersons. Ashley used to worry about their grandson too, back when she was still alive to worry about anything at all. Now it was just me, Wesley Morrison, 65 years old, and carrying that gnawing feeling in my gut whenever I thought about Madison's marriage to Preston. My name's Wesley, and I spent 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers before another 25 building bridges and highways across Ohio. You learn to spot structural problems before they become disasters in that line of work. Same principle applies to families, I've learned. In the military, we called it situational awareness, the ability to read signs that others miss. Sometimes you see the cracks forming long before the collapse, whether it's in concrete or in people. The clock read 1:30 p.m. Time to go surprise the family for Thanksgiving dinner. I'd planned to leave earlier, but that text about the Hendersons had me thinking. Maybe it was my training, but something about Madison's last few phone calls had set off warning bells. The way she'd cut conversations short. The careful way she chose her words when talking about Preston and Caleb. I shifted into reverse and backed onto Veterans Boulevard, snow starting to fall in fat flakes that stuck to everything and made the roads treacherous. The radio crackled with weather warnings as I turned onto I-75 south toward Cincinnati. Same classic rock station Ashley and I always listened to. Led Zeppelin was playing something heavy that matched my mood. The passenger seat held 2 gift bags, one with a new baseball glove for Caleb, genuine leather that cost me $85. The other had comic books, the kind with superheroes he'd been reading since he was 12. Now 18, he probably thought he was too old for them, but I remembered being 18. You're never too old for heroes, especially when the real ones in your life let you down. Family is all we have left, Ashley used to say when she'd catch me grumbling about holiday visits. She'd been right then, and she was right now, even though her voice only existed in my memory. After losing her 2 years ago, every gathering felt precious and fragile, but also dangerous, like walking through a minefield where one wrong step could destroy everything. The windshield wipers struggled against the accumulating snow. Other cars crawled along at half the speed limit, hazard lights blinking like nervous fireflies. I kept both hands on the wheel and maintained a steady 40 mph. In the Corps, we had a saying, better to arrive late than not at all. No point getting to the family if I ended up in a ditch. Exit signs counted down the miles to Cincinnati. I tried calling Madison's house, wanting to let them know I was coming, maybe surprise them less dramatically than just showing up. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Strange. Usually someone was home on Thanksgiving afternoon, especially with dinner prep happening. That military training kicked in again. In hostile territory, when communications go dark, you assume trouble. I'd been in enough tense situations to recognize the signs. The missed calls from Caleb that went unreturned, Madison's excuses about why he couldn't come visit this summer, the bruises I'd noticed during our fishing trip that he'd explained away too quickly. A gas station appeared through the snow, bright fluorescent lights cutting through the gray afternoon like a lighthouse. I pulled in, filled the tank, and went inside to grab some coffee and a bag of those peppermints Caleb liked. The clerk, a young guy with tired eyes, shook his head at the weather. "Roads are getting worse by the hour," he said, scanning my items. "You driving far? Just to Cincinnati? Family dinner? Be careful out there. Saw 3 accidents already today." Back in the truck, I checked the time again. 1:45 p.m. The drive usually took 45 minutes, but today it would be closer to an hour. I thought about Caleb, probably helping his mother in the kitchen, maybe watching football with Preston. The boy had grown so much since summer when we went fishing at Lake Erie. Caught his first base that day, grinned like he'd won the lottery. That's when I'd noticed the bruise on his arm. When I asked about it, he'd gotten quiet, said something about falling off his bike. But the mark looked wrong, too precise, too much like fingers. I should have pressed harder, should have asked more questions. Ashley would have known what to do. She always had better instincts about people than I did. As a former soldier and engineer, I was trained to assess threats and structural integrity. What I'd been seeing in my family had all the hallmarks of a system under stress. The question was whether I'd recognize the warning signs in time to prevent a complete collapse. The snow kept falling as I took exit 15 toward Madison's neighborhood. Suburban streets lined with two-story houses, each one decorated with pumpkins and autumn wreaths. Christmas lights were already going up on some of them, twinkling through the white curtain of snow like beacons of normalcy in what felt like an increasingly unstable world. I turned into Liberty Hills subdivision, driving slowly past houses where families were probably gathered around dining tables, sharing stories and passing dishes. Warm light spilled from windows, creating golden rectangles on snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a good day, a healing day. Ashley would have wanted that. She always believed in the power of family gatherings to mend what was broken. Madison Street appeared ahead, and I could see her house at the end of the block. The blue two-story with white shutters, Preston's pickup in the driveway next to her sedan. Smoke rose from the chimney and holiday decorations covered the front porch. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. But my military training had taught me that the most dangerous situations often appeared perfectly calm on the surface. I slowed the truck as I approached, already imagining the surprise on their faces when I knocked on the door. Maybe Caleb would run to hug me like he used to when he was smaller. Maybe this Thanksgiving would be the start of healing our family, the way Ashley always dreamed it could be. But something felt off. Call it intuition or experience, but the scene ahead didn't sit right. I pulled into the driveway behind Preston's truck at exactly 2:15 p.m., the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the falling snow, I could see holiday lights twinkling around the front door and hear faint music from inside the house. Something warm and inviting, like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. The perfect American family scene. Then I saw him. Caleb sat on the front steps, hunched over with his arms wrapped around his knees. No coat, no hat, just a thin, long-sleeved shirt and jeans already dusted with snow. His shoulders shook, not just from cold, but something deeper. In the military, we learned to spot distress signals from a distance. This wasn't just discomfort. This was a person in genuine crisis. Jesus Christ, I muttered, throwing open the truck door. The wind hit me like a slap, carrying ice crystals that stung my face. In the few seconds it took me to reach him, I could see his lips had turned blue and his hands were pressed tight against his body, trying to conserve warmth. Body language I'd seen in hypothermia cases during winter training exercises. "Caleb," I called out, breaking into a run across the slippery driveway, "what are you doing out here?" He looked up, and the relief in his eyes nearly broke my heart. His face was pale, almost gray, with red patches on his cheeks where the cold had bitten deepest. The kind of exposure that could cause permanent damage if left unchecked. "Grandpa." His voice came out as barely a whisper, teeth chattering so hard he could barely form words. I can't." I was already pulling off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it around his shoulders before he could finish the sentence. The boy was ice cold, his whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Core temperature drop was obvious. This wasn't someone who'd just stepped outside for a few minutes. "What do you mean you can't?" "Can't what?" I helped him stand, steadying him when his legs nearly buckled. My engineering mind automatically calculated exposure time based on temperature and his condition. This was hours, not minutes. "How long have you been sitting out here?" "I'm not allowed." He pulled my coat tighter around himself, and I could feel him shaking through the thick fabric. "I'm not allowed to go in the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind us, through the brightly lit windows, I could hear laughter and the sound of a television. The warm glow of family celebration while my grandson sat freezing on the front steps like some kind of punishment. Like a prisoner in his own home. "What do you mean, not allowed?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but anger was building in my chest like a fire. 20 years of military discipline helped me keep control, but just barely. "This is your home." Caleb flinched at my tone, and I immediately softened it. The last thing he needed was another adult yelling at him. I could see the fear in his posture, the way he made himself smaller. Classic signs of someone who'd learned that drawing attention meant trouble. "Please don't make it worse for me," he whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. "Please, Grandpa, if Preston hears you." That's when the full picture started coming into focus. The military had taught me pattern recognition, how to piece together intelligence from scattered data points. And what I was seeing here painted a picture I didn't want to believe. I looked at the house. really looked at it. The decorations, the warm lights, the sounds of celebration. Then I looked at my grandson, blue-lipped and shivering in clothes that wouldn't keep him warm in 50-degree weather, let alone this near-freezing nightmare. The temperature gauge in my truck had read 25 degrees when I'd parked. In military terms, this was a survival situation. "How long, Caleb?" I kept my voice gentle but firm, using the tone I'd learned worked best when extracting information from scared soldiers. "How long have you been out here?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. Since this morning." "This morning?" I checked my watch. 2:15. "Son, it's below freezing out here. You could get frostbite, could—" I stopped myself before I scared him worse than he already was. But the calculation was automatic. 3 hours in these conditions without proper gear could cause serious injury. I tried the front door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. They'd locked him out of his own home on Thanksgiving Day and left him to freeze while they enjoyed their holiday dinner. The implications hit me like incoming artillery. "We need to get you warm," I said, guiding him toward my truck. "Come on, let's get you in the cab where there's heat." But even as I moved to protect him, my mind was working, cataloging details with military precision. The way he'd flinched when I raised my voice, the bruises I'd noticed during our fishing trip, the careful way he moved, like someone who'd learned to make himself small and invisible. Classic signs of abuse that my training should have helped me recognize sooner. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. "Caleb," I said as I helped him into the passenger seat and turned the heat to maximum, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened today." I cranked the heat to full blast and wrapped another blanket from my emergency kit around Caleb's shoulders. His hands were so numb he couldn't grip anything properly, so I held them between mine, trying to rub warmth back into his fingers. The skin was pale and waxy. Early-stage frostbite. We'd caught it just in time. "Talk to me, son," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "What happened this morning?" He stared down at his hands, still shaking. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to check on it while she took a shower." His voice was small, ashamed. I forgot to turn off the oven timer when I took it out to baste it." "You forgot a timer?" The turkey got a little burnt on top. Not ruined, just darker than usual. He finally looked at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. Preston came in and saw it, and he lost it. I felt my jaw clench. 20 years of military discipline helped me keep my expression neutral, but inside I was calculating threat levels and response options. Lost it how? Started yelling about how I'd ruined the whole holiday, said the guests would think Mom couldn't cook, that I was an embarrassment to the family. Caleb pulled the blanket tighter. Then he said I needed to think about my actions and that I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned some responsibility. "And your mother?" The question came out harder than I intended. Caleb looked away. "She tried to say something at first, but Preston told her to stay out of it, said this was between him and me." He swallowed hard. "She didn't say anything after that." I checked my watch again. 2:20. "Caleb, what time did this happen?" "Around 11 this morning. 3 hours. 3 hours in weather that could kill someone, over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted just fine. In the military, leaving someone exposed to the elements was considered torture. What Preston had done met every definition of abuse I'd ever learned. I had to take several deep breaths before I could speak without shouting. "Has this happened before?" The question hung in the air between us. I could see him wrestling with whether to tell me the truth, probably weighing the consequences of honesty against the relief of finally having someone to tell. In interrogation training, this was the moment when subjects either broke down or shut down completely. "Sometimes," he whispered, "when I mess up." Last month he made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to take out the trash, and once he locked me in the basement for 2 days because I accidentally broke one of his beer bottles. Each word felt like a punch to my gut. I looked at my grandson, this smart, kind boy who'd never hurt anyone in his life, and saw the careful way he held himself, like someone who'd learned that taking up too much space could be dangerous, like a prisoner of war who'd been systematically broken down. "Your mother knows about this?" "She says Preston's just trying to teach me discipline, that I need to be more responsible." His voice cracked. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just Don't. I turned in the seat to face him fully. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that man is doing to you isn't discipline. It's abuse, and it's going to stop today. Caleb's eyes went wide with panic. No, Grandpa, please. If you make a scene, he'll just take it out on me later. He always does. I could see the house through the windshield, still glowing warm and inviting, still full of laughter and holiday music. Inside, my daughter was serving dinner to guests while her husband's stepson sat freezing in a truck, too afraid to ask for basic human decency. The contrast was obscene. Listen to me, I said, taking his hands again. You are 18 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore, and I'm not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money. I can't afford college without... You'll come home with me tonight. The decision crystallized as I spoke, with the same clarity I'd felt when making tactical decisions under fire. We'll figure out the rest later. I could see the hope and terror warring in his expression. Hope, because maybe, finally, someone was going to stand up for him. Terror, because he'd learned not to trust that things could actually get better. He won't let me leave, Caleb said quietly. He'll call the police, say I stole something, or that you're kidnapping me. I looked at the house again, at the warm lights and holiday decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Ashley had always been the diplomatic one, the one who smoothed over family conflicts with patience and understanding. But Ashley wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't protected my grandson from 3 hours in near-freezing weather. In the military, we had rules of engagement. Sometimes you tried negotiation first. Sometimes the situation demanded immediate decisive action. This felt like the latter. Let me worry about Preston, I said, opening the truck door. Right now we're going to get your things. I stepped out into the snow, my boots crunching on the accumulating white. Behind me, I heard Caleb scramble to follow, my coat still wrapped around his shoulders. The front door was still locked, but I had no intention of knocking politely and asking permission. My mind flashed back to my military training and construction experience. Sometimes you have to breach a structure to gain entry. Sometimes you have to apply force to overcome resistance. I'd kicked down doors in Baghdad and broken through walls with sledgehammers on job sites. This door wouldn't be a problem. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, studying his face more carefully. Now that I was really looking, I could see faint bruises along his jawline, partially hidden by the shadows and cold reddened skin. Signs I should have recognized months ago. I tried to hint, he whispered, pulling my coat tighter. But you always talk to Mom, and she... The memory hit me like incoming mortar. Last month when Caleb had called while I was fixing dinner, his voice small and uncertain. Grandpa, Preston says I can't eat dinner with them anymore. Says I have to earn my way back to the table. I'd laughed it off, thought it was teenage drama. Called Madison the next day and she'd brushed it aside with that practiced ease she'd developed since marrying Preston. Dad, you're overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Caleb exaggerates everything. You know how teenagers are. Another memory surfaced. Summer phone call, Caleb sounding exhausted. Mom, Preston yelled at me again about leaving dishes in the sink. He made me wash every dish in the house twice. When I'd asked Madison about it later, she'd sighed that martyred sigh. He's just being dramatic. Preston's trying to teach him responsibility. How long has he been treating you like this? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would destroy me. Since Mom married him 3 years ago. Caleb's voice was barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't perfect. Then it got worse. I remembered the fishing trip this past summer, how Caleb had seemed reluctant to go home, kept asking if we could stay another day. When I'd pressed him about it, he'd just shrugged and said he liked being on the lake. But now I could see it differently. The way he'd grown quiet when I mentioned driving him back. The shadow that crossed his face when he talked about school starting. He wasn't being antisocial. He was terrified to go home. The basement incident, I said, the pieces clicking together like intelligence reports finally making sense. You mentioned sleeping in the garage. How many times? More than I want to count. He was looking at his hands now, and I could see the shame he carried. Last winter, he locked me out for forgetting to shovel the driveway. I slept in your truck when you visited for Christmas Eve. My truck. He'd slept in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside enjoying eggnog and thinking what a wonderful family holiday we were having. The guilt hit me like a physical blow, like shrapnel tearing through my chest. All those signs I'd missed, all those calls for help I'd dismissed as teenage attitude. I looked toward the house where warm light spilled from every window and I could hear the faint sound of laughter. A perfect suburban holiday scene while my grandson nearly froze to death on the front steps. The American dream turned into a nightmare, and I'd been too blind to see it. "Your mother knows about all of this?" Caleb nodded miserably. "She says Preston's just trying to make me a better person, that I need to stop being so sensitive and learn to follow rules." The rage was building now, hot and focused. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my vision seemed to sharpen and narrow. Ashley used to warn me about my temper, told me to count to 10 before acting when I got like this. In the military, they called it controlled aggression, channeling fury into tactical effectiveness. But Ashley wasn't here, and counting wouldn't help my grandson. I stood up, still keeping Caleb wrapped in my coat. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the truck's hood and windshield. "Come on, we're going inside. Grandpa, no, please, if you make a scene, he'll just... What?" I turned to face him fully. "Make you sleep outside in freezing weather? Beat you? Starve you?" I could hear my voice getting harder, the command tone I'd used with subordinates who needed to understand the gravity of a situation. "Son, it can't get much worse than what's already happening." Caleb looked toward the front door with fear in his eyes. You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him. But I was already walking toward the house, my grandson following reluctantly behind me. The front door looked solid and expensive, Preston's pride showing in every detail of his perfect suburban fortress. Heavy oak with brass fixtures probably cost more than some people made in a month, built to keep people out, or in this case, to keep someone in and someone else out. I'd breached stronger doors in Iraq with nothing but a boot and determination. This wouldn't be a problem. My construction experience kicked in automatically. I examined the door frame, the hinges, the lock mechanism. Standard residential construction, not reinforced. The lock was mid-grade, installed in what looked like pine framing. One good kick beside the lock, where the wood was weakest, would do it. The key was hitting the right spot with enough force to fracture the frame without destroying the entire doorway. "Grandpa?" Caleb whispered behind me, his voice full of terror. "Please, don't do this. If you go in there angry, he'll make my life hell after you leave." I paused, my hand on the door frame. In the military, we called this moment the point of no return, when you commit to an action that can't be undone. Once I kicked down this door, there would be no going back to family dinners and polite conversation. This would be war. But looking at Caleb's blue lips and the defeat in his shoulders, I realized the war had already started. I'd just been too busy playing peacekeeper to notice my family was under siege. "After I leave," I turned to look at him. "Son, you're not staying here after today. Not tonight, not ever again." The certainty in my voice seemed to surprise us both. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision anymore. This was strategic planning, tactical thinking applied to family protection. I'd sworn an oath once to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath didn't end when I took off the uniform. Through the window beside the door, I could see into the living room. Madison was visible in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron and looking harried. She was carrying a serving dish, probably rushing to get everything perfect for Preston's approval. Even from here, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she moved. My daughter had become a stranger, a woman walking on eggshells in her own home. When had that happened? When had the confident single mother who'd raised Caleb on her own turned into this nervous shadow? Preston appeared in the frame for a moment, gesturing with what looked like a wine glass. Even his posture screamed dominance, chest out, chin up, the stance of a man who ruled his domain through intimidation. I'd seen that body language before, in sergeants who led through fear instead of respect. It never ended well. The sound of laughter drifted through the walls, casual, relaxed conversation while my grandson had been suffering in silence just yards away. The disconnect was staggering. I thought about Ashley and what she would want me to do. She'd always believed in family, in working things out through communication and understanding, but she'd also been fierce when it came to protecting the people she loved. If she could see Caleb now, shivering and defeated, she wouldn't hesitate. "Stand back," I told Caleb, positioning myself for maximum force and leverage. I didn't bother knocking. My boot hit the door just beside the lock with all the force I could muster. 65 years old, but decades of construction work and military training had left me with more strength than most men half my age. The wood splintered with a crack that echoed through the neighborhood, and the door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall. The warm air rushed out to meet us, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and the sound of shocked silence. I stepped into the entryway, Caleb close behind me, and took in the scene that stopped me cold. The dining room table was set like something from a magazine, white tablecloth, candles flickering, crystal glasses catching the light. Preston sat at the head of the table in a pressed button-down shirt, carving knife in hand. Madison was beside him in a green dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled. A younger girl, maybe 10 years old, sat across from them with a fork full of mashed potatoes halfway to her mouth. They were all frozen mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on their perfect holiday moment. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. Here they sat, warm and comfortable, enjoying their feast, while Caleb had been shivering outside for 3 hours. The turkey looked golden and beautiful, probably the replacement for the one Caleb had supposedly ruined. Everything was pristine, peaceful, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should look like. Everything except the fact that they'd left a child outside to freeze. "Have you completely lost your minds?" My voice boomed through the room, carrying the authority I'd learned commanding troops under fire. The little girl dropped her fork with a clatter. Madison's face went white as paper, and the serving spoon in her hand hit the table, sending gravy spattering across the white cloth like blood on snow. "Dad?" Madison's voice came out as a squeak. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "While you're sitting here feasting like royalty, that boy was freezing outside." I pointed directly at Caleb, who was still wrapped in my coat and shivering, despite the warm air. 3 hours, Madison. 3 hours in weather that could have killed him. Preston slowly set down his carving knife and rose from his chair. He was bigger than I remembered, probably outweighed me by 50 pounds, but I'd faced down larger opponents in combat zones. Size didn't always matter when you had training and righteous fury on your side. "Who gave you permission to enter my house?" His voice was controlled but dangerous, the tone of a man who wasn't used to being challenged in his own domain. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." I could see him taking my measure, calculating whether he could intimidate me into backing down. His chest puffed out slightly, and he moved around the table toward us with the predatory confidence of someone who ruled through fear. Classic alpha male posturing that I'd seen in weak leaders who compensated with aggression. Private property? I stepped forward to meet him, using the command presence I'd learned in officer training. "You mean the property where you locked my grandson outside to freeze while you ate dinner?" The younger daughter started crying, confused and frightened by the shouting. Madison reached over to comfort her, but her eyes never left my face. I could see the conflict there, torn between protecting her father and defending her husband. "This is a private family matter," Preston said, his voice rising with anger and embarrassment at being challenged. "And you have no business." "No business?" I could feel the heat rising in my face, the controlled rage that had served me well in dangerous situations. "That's my grandson you nearly killed with your private family matter." Behind me, Caleb pressed closer, and I could feel him trembling, not just from cold now, but from fear of what was about to happen. This was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Preston in his own house, and we all knew it was about to get ugly. The holiday music was still playing softly in the background, some cheerful song about gratitude and family togetherness. The irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed directly at Caleb, my finger steady despite the rage coursing through me. "Look at him, Preston. Really look at what you've done." Preston crossed his arms and lifted his chin, every inch the man who believed he was justified in his actions. The stance of someone who'd never been held accountable for his cruelty. The boy ruined our holiday. He needed to learn a lesson about responsibility and consequences. A lesson? I could barely believe what I was hearing. "You nearly froze a child to death over a slightly burnt turkey. He's 18, not a child. And this is my house with my rules." Preston's voice took on that patronizing tone men use when they think they're being reasonable. "I'm trying to teach him discipline, something his mother obviously failed to do in his first 17 years. Madison flinched at that like she'd been slapped but didn't say anything. Just sat there in her green dress, looking between us like she was watching a tennis match instead of a fight for her son's welfare. The woman who'd once been strong enough to raise a child alone had been reduced to a silent bystander in her own home. Discipline. I stepped closer to the table, close enough to see the grease on Preston's plate, the wine stain on his lips. My voice dropped to the deadly calm I'd used when addressing soldiers who'd crossed the line. That's called child abuse, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now. Child abuse? Preston actually laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. He forgot to turn off a timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I sent him outside to think about his actions. That's not abuse, that's parenting. For 3 hours in 25-degree weather, he's being dramatic, just like always. Preston waved his hand dismissively like he was shooing away a fly. Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I looked at Caleb, still wrapped in my coat, his lips blue and his whole body shaking. Fine. This man thought hypothermia was fine. In the military, we had a term for officers who showed such callous disregard for their men's welfare. They were called incompetent, and they were removed from command. Dad, please. Madison finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Don't ruin our holiday. We can discuss this later, as a family. Ruin your holiday? I turned to stare at my daughter, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. Your son was sitting outside freezing while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday? She looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. Preston was he was trying to teach Caleb responsibility. Sometimes boys need firm guidance. Firm guidance? My voice cracked with disbelief. Madison, when you were 18 and you dented my truck, did I lock you outside in a blizzard? When you failed your math test, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's different, she whispered. How? How is it different? Preston stepped between us, his face red with anger. Because this is my house, and Caleb is not my biological son. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit. There it was, the truth finally out in the open. Caleb wasn't his blood, so Caleb didn't matter. The boy was nothing more than an inconvenience to be controlled and punished. I'd seen this mentality before in weak men who used their position to abuse those who couldn't fight back. You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd given orders in life and death situations. 30 seconds to show some basic human decency. Preston's laugh was even colder this time. I don't owe that boy anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can find somewhere else to live. The little girl was crying harder now, and Madison was making shushing noises, but I could barely hear them. All I could see was Preston's smug face. All I could think about was Caleb sitting on those steps for 3 hours, believing he deserved it. Somewhere else to live. I stepped even closer, close enough to smell the wine on Preston's breath, close enough to see the sweat forming on his forehead as he realized this wasn't going the way he'd expected. You're right about that. He is going somewhere else to live. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. The movement was deliberate, slow enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly what I was considering. In negotiations, sometimes the threat of action was more powerful than action itself. Preston's face changed when he saw the phone. The smug confidence cracked just slightly around the edges, like a wall showing stress fractures before collapse. Either you apologize to my grandson right now, I said, my voice deadly calm, or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse. You wouldn't dare. Preston stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me, but I'd faced down bigger men than him in hostile territory, and I wasn't backing down from anyone who hurt my family. Try me. I started dialing the first number, each beep echoing through the silent room like a countdown. I've got plenty to tell them about leaving an 18-year-old outside in freezing weather for 3 hours. Behind me, Caleb gripped my arm. I could feel him trembling, but not from cold anymore. This was fear of a different kind, the terror of someone who'd learned that standing up only made things worse. Dad, please. Madison finally moved, stepping between us with her hands raised like she was trying to stop a bar fight. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything. I kept my eyes locked on Preston, reading his body language the way I'd learned to read enemy soldiers. He was scared now, which made him more dangerous. He did that when he decided to abuse my grandson. Abuse? Preston's laugh was harsh and bitter. I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never bothered to do. Madison flinched like he'd slapped her, but she didn't defend herself, just stood there taking it the way she probably always did. The strong woman I'd raised had been systematically broken down, turned into an enabler for her husband's cruelty. "Get out of my house, old man," Preston continued, his voice rising as his control slipped. "You have no authority here. Caleb is my responsibility now." "Your responsibility?" I looked around the perfect dining room, the crystal glasses, the fine china, the holiday centerpiece that probably cost more than some families spent on groceries in a month, then back at my grandson's bruised face. "Is this how you handle responsibility? Locking children outside to freeze?" The younger daughter was crying harder now, confused and frightened by the shouting. Madison moved to comfort her, but kept glancing between me and Preston like she was watching a disaster unfold and couldn't decide which side to help. "He's not a child, he's 18, Preston said, straightening his shoulders and trying to reclaim his authority through volume. "And in my house, adults who can't follow simple instructions face adult consequences. Adult consequences for forgetting to turn off a timer. Adult consequences for being careless and destructive, for ruining our holiday and embarrassing our family in front of our guests." Preston gestured toward the empty chairs where other family members had obviously been sitting before I arrived. Everyone had to leave because of the scene he caused. I looked at those empty chairs and felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. They'd had guests. People had been here eating dinner and socializing while Caleb sat outside freezing. And none of them had questioned it. None of them had said a word. They'd all been complicit in this abuse, turning a blind eye to maintain the comfortable fiction of a perfect family holiday. "Grandpa, let's just go," Caleb whispered behind me. "Please, I don't want to cause any more problems." The defeat in his voice broke something inside me. This boy, this smart, kind young man, had been beaten down so thoroughly that he thought he was the problem, that he was causing trouble by asking for basic human decency. It was the voice of a prisoner who'd given up hope of rescue. "You're not causing problems, son," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You never were." I turned back to Preston, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. 20 years of military service had taught me when negotiation was pointless, when the only option left was decisive action. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson for what you did today." "I'm not apologizing for anything." Preston crossed his arms, chin raised in defiance. "And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline." "Then we're done here." I closed the phone and put it back in my pocket. "Caleb, go get your things. You're coming home with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the little girl stopped crying for a moment. The magnitude of what I'd just declared hit the room like a shockwave. "You can't just take him," Madison said, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch me." I placed my hand firmly on Caleb's shoulder, guiding him away from the dining room table and toward the stairs. My voice carried the absolute authority I'd learned commanding soldiers in dangerous situations. "Go pack whatever you need, we're leaving." "Dad, you can't do this." Madison followed us, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just walk into our house and take my son." "I can, and I am." I kept walking, staying between Caleb and the rest of the family, using my body as a shield the way I'd protected my men under fire. "Unless you'd prefer I call the authorities and let them sort it out." Caleb led the way up the narrow staircase to the second floor, his steps quick and uncertain. I could hear Preston behind us, his heavy footsteps on the hardwood, like approaching thunder, but I didn't turn around. In hostile territory, you never showed your back to the enemy unless you were confident in your tactical position. "This is kidnapping," Preston called out, his voice cracking with impotent rage. "I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Good luck explaining to the police why my grandson was sitting outside in 25-degree weather for 3 hours. I reached the top of the stairs and followed Caleb down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, no heat vent that I could see, and the single window faced north, letting in the coldest air. It looked more like a storage room than a bedroom, and it was clearly the worst room in the house. Even in military barracks, we'd treated our soldiers better than this. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. Caleb nodded, already pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them into a duffel bag. "Preston says the basement room is for guests, and the other upstairs room is for Brooke." I noticed he didn't call her our sister, just Brooke. Even in his own home, he He was an outsider, a second-class citizen in his own family. "Take everything that matters to you," I said, standing guard at the doorway while he packed, scanning for threats the way I'd learned in combat zones. "We're not coming back for anything. Caleb, think about what you're doing." Madison appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "This is your home, your family." "Some family," Caleb muttered, folding a Dayton University sweatshirt into his bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze. Preston was just trying to teach you responsibility by giving me hypothermia." Caleb looked up at his mother, and I could see 3 years of hurt and disappointment in his eyes. "Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink." "A glass?" Madison's face crumpled as if she was finally seeing the full picture. "That's not normal. He has high standards. He wants you to be better. He wants me gone," Caleb said quietly, zipping up his bag. "And you know it." The truth hung in the air between mother and son like smoke from a battlefield. Madison couldn't deny it anymore, couldn't pretend this was normal discipline or tough love. Her husband wanted her son gone, and she'd chosen her marriage over her child's welfare. We made our way back downstairs, Preston waiting at the bottom like a sentry guarding his territory. His face was red with anger and humiliation at being defied in his own home. "You leave my house, boy, and you don't come back, ever." "Fine by me," Caleb said, and I heard real strength in his voice for the first time all day. The voice of someone who'd finally found an ally worth fighting alongside. The front door was still hanging open from when I'd kicked it in, cold air pouring into the house and making the holiday decorations flutter like dying leaves. I could see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust visible in the frigid air like a beacon calling us home. "Caleb," Madison called out as we reached the door, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. I love you." He stopped, turned back to look at his mother one last time. For a moment I thought he might waver, might give her one more chance to choose him over Preston. "If you loved me, Mom," he said quietly, "you wouldn't have let this happen." The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, one hand pressed to her mouth, finally understanding the full cost of her choices. We walked to my truck in silence, our breath visible in the freezing air like ghosts escaping from our past. I threw his bag in the bed and helped him into the passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side. Through the front window of the house, I could see the family still standing in the entryway. Madison crying, Preston red-faced with rage, Brooke peeking around the corner like a war refugee hiding from artillery fire. "You ready?" I asked, putting the truck in reverse. "I've been ready for 3 years, Caleb said, pulling my coat tighter around his shoulders. I backed out of the driveway and onto the street, past the other decorated houses where normal families were probably finishing their Thanksgiving dinners in peace. The radio was still playing classic rock, the heater was working perfectly, and for the first time since I'd arrived, Caleb looked like he could actually breathe. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said quietly as we turned onto the main road toward the highway. "I can't believe you came for me. I should have come sooner," I said, meaning every word. The guilt would be with me forever. All those signs I'd missed, all those calls for help I'd dismissed. I should have seen what was happening. I tried to tell you, but I didn't know how. We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the familiar weight of family responsibility settling around my shoulders like Ashley's favorite quilt. This boy needed protection, needed a safe place to heal and grow into the man he was meant to become. It was a mission I understood, a duty that felt as natural as breathing. "Tell me about college," I said as we merged onto I-75 North. "What are you studying?" "Engineering." His voice got stronger when he talked about school. "Mechanical engineering like you used to do with the Corps, like grandfather, like grandson." I smiled, thinking about Ashley and how proud she would have been. "We'll figure out the tuition. Don't worry about that. I've got veteran benefits we can look into, maybe some scholarships through the American Legion." "Grandpa, I don't want to be a burden." "Son, you're not a burden. You're family. And family takes care of each other. That's what real families do." The snow continued falling as we drove north, but inside the truck it was warm and safe. For the first time in hours, I felt like I'd accomplished something worthwhile. In the military, we had a saying, "Leave no man behind." It applied to family just as much as it did to soldiers. My driveway looked smaller than usual with both trucks parked side by side, but the house itself seemed to glow with welcome as we approached. I'd left the porch light on out of habit, and now I was grateful for that small beacon cutting through the winter darkness. "Home sweet home," I said, helping Caleb carry his bag to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and warm air rushed out to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and the lingering scent of Ashley's lavender sachets. It wasn't much, a modest ranch with worn furniture and carpet that had seen better days, but it was paid for and it was ours. "You remember where the guest room is?" I asked, flipping on lights as we moved through the living room. "Yeah, down the hall next to your room." Caleb looked around with obvious relief. "It's so warm in here. Thermostat set to 72 year-round. Your grandmother always said life was too short to be cold in your own house." I showed him to the guest room and helped him get settled. The room was simple but comfortable. A double bed with one of Ashley's quilts, a dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Photos of family gatherings lined the walls, including several of Caleb at various ages. This had always been his room when he visited, and seeing him here now felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since Ashley died. "I'll get some dinner started," I said. "Nothing fancy. I've got chicken in the freezer and some vegetables that need using up." "Can I help?" he asked, and I could see how desperately he wanted to be useful, to earn his keep. 3 years of abuse had taught him that he had to work for basic kindness. "Sure, but you don't have to. This is your home now, not a job." We worked together in the kitchen, and gradually the day's tension began to leave Caleb's shoulders. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while he washed vegetables, and we moved around each other with the easy rhythm of family members who'd cooked together before. "Tell me more about what's been happening," I said as I seasoned the chicken. "Start from the beginning, when your mother married Preston." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to decide how much to share. It started small. Little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or left my shoes in the wrong place. Then it got bigger. How much bigger? He controls everything. When I eat, what I eat, when I can shower, when I can use the phone. Caleb's voice got smaller as he continued. He made Mom choose between him and me, and she chose him. I had to stop seasoning the chicken for a moment and grip the counter. "What do you mean she chose him?" "Last Christmas when you visited, remember how I was quiet during dinner? Preston had told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless someone asked me a direct question, and Mom didn't say anything to stop him." The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought Caleb was just being a typical moody teenager. I'd even joked with Ashley about it later, saying kids these days didn't know how to make conversation. "Why doesn't your mother stand up to him? She's scared." Caleb started chopping carrots with mechanical precision. "She told me once that if she leaves him, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that apartment complex where we used to live. She can't afford to take care of us on her own." I slid the chicken into the oven and started a fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar ritual of wadding newspaper and stacking kindling helped calm my racing thoughts. As I worked, I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the times I could have intervened sooner. "Come sit with me," I said when the fire was crackling steadily. "Tell me about the good things. Tell me about school, about your friends." We settled into the comfortable chairs by the fire, and for the first time all day, Caleb smiled. "I made Dean's List last semester, and I've got this friend, Hunter, who's teaching me to play guitar. Your grandmother always wanted to learn guitar." I pointed to a framed photo on the mantel showing Ashley at age 20, laughing and holding an acoustic guitar. She said music was the language of the soul. I remember her saying that. Caleb studied the photo with new interest. "I miss her." "Me too, son. Me too." We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories of Ashley and making plans for Caleb's spring semester. The house felt alive again with conversation and laughter, the way it used to when Ashley was here to fill the quiet spaces. As we sat down to eat our simple but satisfying meal, I looked across the table at my grandson. Really looked at him. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. "We'll call the college tomorrow," I said, cutting into my chicken. "Make sure your financial aid is sorted out, and we'll look into getting you a part-time job if you want one. Grandpa, You don't have to do all this for me." "Yes, I do." I met his eyes across the table. "That's what family's for." The phone rang just as we were finishing dessert, leftover pie I'd found in the freezer. The sound cut through our peaceful evening like a knife, and I could see Caleb tense up immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench. Madison. Then came the knock on the front door. Not the gentle rapping of a neighbor, but the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate compliance. Caleb nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Stay behind me," I said, setting down my own cup and moving toward the door. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like predators waiting for their moment to strike, were Preston and Madison. "Mr. Morrison," the lead officer called out. "Police, we need to speak with you." I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping my body positioned to block their view of Caleb. "What can I do for you, officers?" Preston immediately stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Officer, this man kidnapped my stepson. He broke into our house and took the boy without permission." The investigation proceeded exactly as I'd expected. The lead officer was professional, methodical, asking the right questions. When they asked Caleb if he wanted to stay with me, his quiet, "Yes, sir," carried the weight of 3 years of suffering. Preston's confident facade began to crack when the officer asked about the outdoor punishment. And when Madison finally found her courage and told the truth about the locked door, the pattern of abuse, the systematic control, I watched Preston's world collapse around him. "Mrs. Morrison, has this kind of punishment happened before?" the officer asked. "Yes." The word came out like a dam bursting. "He's made Caleb sleep in the garage in the basement. He's locked him out of the house overnight. He controls when Caleb can eat, when he can shower, when he can speak at the dinner table." As they led Preston away in handcuffs, he turned back with pure venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this betrayal, Madison. You'll lose everything. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son," she said. And for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who'd raised Caleb on her own. 4 months later, the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as Madison flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Caleb sat at the table, reviewing his acceptance letter from Ohio State's engineering program. "Full scholarship," he said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing it. "They're actually paying me to go to school." "That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard," Madison said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The part-time job at the local library had given her independence she'd never had before, and the divorce settlement had provided enough money for her to start over. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since Ashley died, full of conversation and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Madison had moved in permanently after Preston's conviction for child endangerment. The guest room had become her space, and we'd converted the basement into a proper bedroom for Caleb. Not a punishment cell like at Preston's house, but a comfortable retreat with good heating and windows that actually opened. Later that evening, as we sat by the fireplace after dinner, Caleb looked up from his guitar practice. "Grandpa, I've been thinking about changing my major. From engineering to what? Social work? Maybe counseling?" He set down his guitar and looked at me seriously. "I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through." I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took my breath away. This young man, who had every right to be bitter and angry, wanted to use his experience to help others. "That's a fine goal," I said. "Your grandmother always said the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it." As the fire crackled peacefully in the grate, I thought about that terrible Thanksgiving day when I'd found Caleb freezing on Preston's doorstep. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes you have to break something down before you can build it back up stronger. We were stronger now, all of us, and Ashley would have been proud of the family we'd become.